When we're talking about the roots of our relationship between Israelis and Palestinians, no matter what your view is, none of us is absolutely right and none of us is absolutely wrong. No matter what the complexity is, the moment that you had 1,000 people cross the border and beheading little kids and kidnapping young ladies and parading women naked on the streets of Gaza and people are chanting, that's not a complex story. This is something that needs to be condemned by anyone. Starting to get more and more stories from people in America. People tell me, we're confused. There's no confusion. Someone that beheads a baby, there's no confusion around it. There's no justification for that.
I'm live with Michael Bauer, a geopolitical specialist, tour guide for the last 24 plus years in Israel and the Middle East, author of this book, which is one of my favorites on the Middle East and Israel. He gave it to us after we did a tour this past June, a couple months ago. Thank you so much for your time, Michael. It's an honor to have you here. And as a Persian Jew, I've always felt a connection to the state of Israel. My family and community fled Iran 40 plus years ago because of religious persecution, and half of my family moved to Israel. So I'd first off like to acknowledge that I definitely have a bias here. I think we both do. And I also want to acknowledge the role that you played, the influential role in connecting me more closely to Israel. On this last trip, we got to go with a diverse group of individuals, not just Jews. And I really got to see Israel through new eyes, which was very unique for me since I've been a handful of times before. And I got to feel the country's and the region's historical significance, beauty, complexity through new perspectives. And that was really special. So I really wanted to have you here. This is a long introduction. I don't think we're going to cover everything because you've been studying this for the last 24 plus years. You wrote a book. You take trips there for 10 to 14 days at least, as well as other regions that are next to it, but thought we could get some insight and your experience considering everything that's top of mind for everyone right now.
Thank you. I'm happy for you taking the time to do this podcast.
Yes, it's been one of arguably the most difficult times for Israel and Jews around the world since maybe the Yom Kippur War, the deadliest day since the Holocaust. Over 1,000 people, 1,300 people brutally murdered, raped, beheaded, slaughtered, hundreds of people taken hostages by Hamas terrorists. Came as a surprise to Israel last week. So it's been about a week since last Saturday morning when this all began. How we were exchanging some messages, and you said, this has changed you, and it has changed the land of Israel, and it will have a ripple effect for the next generation. And I feel that for myself and my family here as a Jew living in Los Angeles and quote unquote diaspora. But for someone like yourself, who's been an expert in this space, who's gone to Middle Eastern countries, who's had several people on your tours who are pro-Palestinian and on the other side, have the Arab narrative coming into this. How has this moment in time changed you?
So first of all, let me just share where I'm physically sitting right now and talking to you, which is very important for the context. People understand who they're listening to. I'm sitting on a kibbutz. It's a small village. We're 120 families. The picture that you saw, and I don't know, some people saw a lot of visual, some people managed to avoid the visual, but what you are talking about as the beheading and the raping and the brutal massacre, the visuals of it, they're on Instagram, they're on TikTok. And I can tell you, because I am speaking constantly, a lot of the people that managed to, the refugee that managed to came here, a lot of them are around our kibbutz. We're hosting a lot of those families. So we're hearing firsthand this brutal massacre, which is heartbreaking, mind-blowing, and it's way worse than anything that you can imagine. I can tell you that just 15 minutes ago, we accompanied officials to announce to a woman that's hosted right now that two of her twin boys, which she thought were kidnapped, were burned so badly. So right now they managed to realize that they're actually dead. That was what I was there half an hour ago. We are protecting our kibbutz because we are taking into consideration that what happened can happen again. I am living within what you might want to call Israel proper. We are not in a settlement. None of the kibbutzim that were attacked were in a settlement. But it's people that are the villages that look visually exactly like ours, and a lot of the people that are living in my community are relatives. So one brother lives here and one brother lives there. So the picture that you have seen are 25 minutes by car from where I'm sitting right now. The Gaza border is, I can see it from my window. Every bomb that comes out or in, I see it from my living room and my kitchen. Okay, so, and when the bombings go on, my house is shaking. So when I'm talking right now about war, about brutality, it's not anything that I've seen on TikTok. It's not something that it's not an academic text. It's firsthand. And I don't know to what extent to share. I also don't want to be, pornographic in a way. But once you saw some of those visuals, it changes your mind. And as someone that made a career out of teaching complexity, and one of the courses that I used to teach is Palestinian narrative. It's literally teaching Israelis, foreigners like you. I was teaching in our own military to dig in and learn how Palestinians view the world. In order for us to have empathy also in times of conflict, a lot of the way I was thinking, right, for years and teaching, suddenly everything has shaken. And you're one of the second interview that I'm doing this week. Actually, there's a lot coming from now, but I actually did not know how to respond, as everything I thought I knew has changed in the last few days, and obviously my emotions are also taking over my intellectual or my analytic abilities. Just more to give you context, as I'm talking to you right now that's my bedroom, right? My kids are in the living room. I am part of a team of 20 kibbutzniks. Kibbutzniks are people that live on a kibbutz. We are armed from head to toe. We are guarding all day long. We are patrolling around our kibbutz. We build our own militia. Most of the men that are in the age of reserve were taken to reserves right now. So all the older people like me, right now I'm 50, which have a combat background, are in this immediate respond team, which will protect our kibbutz. We also know that all those respond teams, from all the kibbutzim that were attacked, 22 of them, almost all of them were killed. They were the first people to be killed. None of them survived the attack. So it's very important for me to share.
Who didn't survive the
response
attacks?
teams of kibbutz.
The response teams.
What happened the last week is that our systems completely failed.
Yeah.
The military, the government. I mean, Israel. We thought we are the strongest military of the Middle East. We are supposedly have a nuclear ability, right? And we were butchered completely for hours, and there was no response. Which is a whole other story. Like, what the hell happened? Where were we, right? And for the first few hours, the people that were fighting were civilians, fighting with whatever they had, and obviously they did not have a lot. They're civilians. Even if they had a pistol or a gun, after a few minutes you're out of bullets, and they were beheaded and butchered completely. And there were so many terrorists. I'm talking about a village in the size of mine, with 12 people like me that are protecting the village, attacked by 200, some of them top Hamas soldiers. And following them came the masses, and that's where you saw also the beheading and the rape and all of that. So while all of that happened just around down the road from where we are right now, and on the other side, just a 2-3 minute drive, we are already on what's known as the Green Line at the beginning of the West Bank, which is a lot of events going up there just because the scale of what's happening in the Gaza no one is covering. There's a lot of activity over there as well. So as I'm speaking to you right now, my WhatsApp of the emergency group is open all the time. We're just prepared to take our guns and go out to the fence around our village to protect our own kids. So I'm just saying that because I will not be as analytic as you know me from when you met me, what was it, a few months ago, where everything was very cold and academic and everything was a context, and that's not the case anymore when people are involved in this way. So I don't remember what exactly was the question, but I thought that's an important framing to the
It was
conversation.
no, you answered it. It was how have you changed? And I'd love to, I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into that. I guess when we spoke, it was really what was apparent was there's this domino effect. It was like this political game of chess that we oftentimes spoke about. The alliances between different countries, the alliances between different groups, the Gaza border, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, the Sinai Peninsula, and how that was given, that was traded for peace with Egypt. A lot of that, and right now, those alliances are still there in certain regions and parts, but it is a much more one-sided. There's less nuance to what Israel needs to do in order to
So
protect itself, and I
I'll
wonder
say a
how
word
you. Please.
about the nuance. There's two stories that are happening right now. We have the roots of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is a nuanced, complex story, and there's a lot of place for narratives. And then there is what happened this week. And people, I think, are confusing the two stories. When we're talking about the roots of our relationship between Israelis and Palestinians, and not all Palestinians are Hamas, and not all people that support Hamas support raping and beheading babies, right? But what happened, and got a lot of, by the way, popularity on the streets within the West Bank, in Gaza, and around the Arab world, and to my knowledge, also in America, mainly because people didn't understand what actually is happening on the ground. So while there is a place, maybe today is not the day to do that, to talk about a complex, nuanced Israeli-Palestinian, Israeli-Arab relationship. No matter what your view is, and I can tell you in one sentence, none of us on both sides is perfect. None of us is absolutely right, and none of us is absolutely wrong. There's two good cases to the conflict. That's why it's so complicated. Otherwise, it would be easy. But that would be the story if we would do that podcast a week ago. No matter what the complexity is, the moment that you had 1,000 people cross the border and beheading, and I have the pictures, and beheading little kids, and kidnapping young ladies, and parading women naked on the streets of Gaza, and people are chanting, that's not a complex story. This is not nuanced at all. This is something that needs to be condemned by anyone. And I think that people are confusing the two stories. They're used to a complex. But this activity is not complex. It's
No,
pure evil.
it's black and white.
Right. And that is where I feel right now a growing frustration. And I'm almost trying not to look and not to see and not to look at social media that comes from America, where people suddenly are trying to justify what Hamas did. I'll give you an example, maybe that Americans can understand. ISIS. You can go back and study the evolution of that organization called ISIS, how it was created in the vacuum in Iraq after the American invasion. That's an intellectual, academic, interesting discussion. But that is a discussion that doesn't justify the beheading that ISIS was doing to hundreds of thousands of people. So you need to differentiate the deep story, and there's time to study it, but some party can actually choose a path that nothing justifies it. That's the case that we're in right now. And I'm responding because I'm starting to get more and more stories from people in America. Almost people tell me we are confused. There's no confusion. Someone that beheads a baby, there's no confusion around it. There's no justification for that.
Yeah, it's been, as a Jew living here, it's been sickening and scary to see the types of responses around the world and even locally, and on social media to what is so clearly to most of us, I hope, terrorism. When you think about Israel's response and the way that Hamas uses human shields and the political the PR sort of nightmare or situation that eventually creates for Israel. Like I see a lot of messages on social media that frustrate me, like, can't there just be peace? does Israel need to go to this length? And I just don't think Israel has a choice. But I'm wondering if you feel differently, given your background, in terms of how do you think you've been in the military, you've been a combat soldier, you've studied this space. What can Israel do besides defend itself?
So, first of all, Israel has to defend itself. But beyond that, in order for me to live here and to be here, I cannot raise my kids with an M16 below my bed. My kids right now are not going anywhere. They're living in a shelter. For us to live a life, we need to make sure that what happened this week will not happen again. And for that, we need to bring down Hamas, because Hamas, we've been involved with Hamas pretty much from 1987. We won't have time right now, but it's a space for at least an hour and a half of a conversation of the evolution of Hamas, and almost every potential attempt to deal with Hamas. Hamas called for the destruction of Israel and forming an Islamic Palestinian state between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. And they're actively moving forward to do that with Iranian influence. This is something that we cannot live with, and maybe we could live with until a week ago. Every once in a while, there was missile, there was a terror attack here, a terror attack that. Easy for me to say it this way because none of my immediate family was affected. But as a nation, we were able to deal with the reality. What Hamas did right now, while Hezbollah, which is way stronger and brutal in the north, is claiming to do in the north the same thing, we can't live and wait for that to happen again. And therefore, Israel, assuming that they can do that, needs to dismantle Hamas completely. The problem, because there's no other way. The problem is that knowing the military and knowing the Palestinian people very well, to destroy Hamas is not just an organization. It's a social movement. It's a state of mind, right? It's a symbol of resistance within the Palestinians and within the Arab Muslim world in general. Not all of it, by the way, not all of it. Most Muslims are condemning Hamas and are condemning what's happening right now. Most Arabs are. I want to believe that most Palestinians are also, but I didn't see a poll. But I'm assuming that, knowing a lot of Palestinian friends that already contact me and ask me if I'm okay. People from Ramallah, people from the West Bank, Palestinians call me to ask on me if I'm okay. So we need to uproot them. The problem is that I don't see a way, and smarter people than me don't see a way how to uproot them without a physical ground operation, because they're not going to give up. They're not going to give up. Israel already acted very violently. There is already a lot of Palestinian casualties, a lot of them uninvolved people, because they're shooting out of houses, hospitals, schools. Israel asked the northern part of the Gaza Strip to evacuate to the south, including 2 hospitals. That's a very complicated thing for the Palestinians to actually do. Hamas told them not to leave, because obviously all the headquarters are underneath those hospitals. So how can we secure our existence over here without killing innocent people? The answer is I don't know. And I can tell you that we will have to walk on a very delicate line in order to, on one hand, secure our physical existence over here, and at the same time, not to burn our souls, not to be part of something that afterwards we can't live with. We need to make sure that there's no Palestinian child that is unnecessarily hit, damaged, or anything like that. But I don't see a way that this operation will not involve also civilians, and that will be a heartbreaking moment, a challenge for our values. Listen, I know people that are in hostage over there. I know a mother with 5 kids, little kids. They took 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old kids, and we don't know if they're alive or not. We just know they vanished. Those kids need to come back. Now, I'm not talking now intellectually. I have a faith. I know the name of the kids. A woman that I know, they killed all her kids and kidnapped her husband. We need to bring them back. Now, by the way, Hamas has an option: give all those people back. But they're not. In the meantime, there's visuals of torture of people in captivity.
They are?
including little kids. Yes, yes. It's visuals already. There was visuals of, of 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 torture. There was visuals of rape. Moving on, not only TikTok. I forgot right now. So, including videos that were sent to the networking of the people that were taken. Now that was happening. What I'm telling you right now was happening on the first chaotic day. It seems like Hamas right now kind of like understood their own PR disaster, right? And first of all, spreading a lot of false pictures. And they didn't do it, and now sending all sort of videos of them saving children, and also I'm seeing those videos because I'm also following the Arab
Yeah,
Arab news.
hanging out with babies and trying to use that to
Right.
say that they're doing something right.
But those babies vanished, right? We don't have those babies. So did they kill the baby later? Are the babies sitting in captivity? Who's breastfeeding them? You've got infants. Did they survive that journey over there? So we don't have the picture. By the way, we don't have the picture. We still have hundreds of bodies that we're trying to figure out who's whom. So there's people that don't know if their family is dead or in captivity. But we have a lot of visual from Gaza taken by people in Gaza of those kidnapped people. So, and you can just imagine what it's doing to our psyche. I mean, take 9/11, what it did to the American psyche. Here in numbers, we're getting to a similar number. And remember that we're a small country. So, in percentage, like take 9/11 and put it 30 times more.
Yeah, it's tens of
We are
thousands of
all
people.
personally involved. Yeah. And then we have our reserve soldiers. They recruited 350,000, or at least over 300,000. That's at least what is seen. I can tell you that the numbers are high. I see them in my own eyes all around. Obviously, that's intimidating the Gazans, because when they go in, it'll be violent. At the same time, we have, my nephew, all our, my son. My son is in the military, not in reserve. But so you can just imagine that everything is very much emotional.
Yeah. How, a couple places to go off from there. You hear people on social media saying Gaza has been an open air prison. Gaza is in occupied territory. And some of the unfortunate things about this is, like, people look at headlines, as they have on social media all the time, and they don't really understand the history. Could you give us a little bit of background?
I'll give you a picture. First of all, the population. Gaza is a strip, a narrow strip populated with over 2 million people. It's very crowded in most places, or at least where people are living is very crowded. And then there's the beaches, and then some fields and agriculture around. Very crowded area. The visuals when you go into Gaza
Have you been
2 weeks
inside there?
ago. I've been in Gaza as a soldier many years ago. Ever since no Israeli civilians can go in, but been following pictures, videos of people inside. And talking to people that are coming in and out. I actually part of an organization that takes Palestinians from the checkpoints to Israeli hospitals when they need it. Anyone, if you're Palestinian, if you are sick, you can get a hospital.
That's what I've heard.
Cancer, stuff like that. So you've got people that live near the border, and when they go to Tel Aviv, they check who needs, and they pick up Palestinians and take them to hospital on the way to work. By the way, it's called B'derech La'achlama in Hebrew, on the way to recovery. I think that's the translation, which means that people from the Gaza perimeter, Israelis that used to take people from Gaza, live around the border. We just got the people on that NGO got a list that many of the people that used to volunteer to take Palestinians to hospitals are either dead or in captivity right now. It's a very narrow strip, heavily populated. And once under the British mandate was part of this land. You had Arabs living over there. In 1948, the strip itself was occupied by Egypt. Now, this piece of land, right, Arabs call all the land in the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Palestine. We call it land of Israel. Then states are political entities on it. That strip was part of what is known as Palestine, controlled under the British mandate, before that under the Ottoman Turkish Empire, was occupied by Egypt in 1948. And that's what created that strip. But into that strip as an outcome of the 48 war, came in a lot of Arab Palestinian refugees, which today are the majority, meaning their descendants are the majority of the population. So the majority of the population of people living in Gaza see themselves originating from places like Jaffa or places that are Israel today. That's the sentiment, right? At first, they were living in that area under an Egyptian occupation, and Egypt never annexed that territory and never gave them any citizenship. In 1967, as part of what is known as the Six-Day War, Israel took over, occupied the Gaza Strip, including all of the Sinai Desert. The Six-Day War is a fascinating war and an important war to study, but we won't do it right now. After several years, we did get an agreement with Egypt, and we gave back the whole Sinai Desert, which is a huge territory, right? Which Gaza Strip is kind of like the edge of that territory, in favor of peace. We had a lot of settlements in the Sinai. We removed all those settlements, and we told the Egyptians, but take Gaza as well. And the Egyptians said, no way, Gaza was never Egypt. Gaza was part of Palestine, and left Gaza as a non-annexed territory under an Israeli control. That's happening from 1982. In 1987, we have what's called the Big Uprising, the Palestinian Uprising, known as Intifada. And that Intifada pretty much drew and created awareness among Israelis that the current status of Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip is not sustainable. Those are people that don't have a Palestinian state, they don't have citizenship in Israel, and they're not happy with that status quo, completely understandably. And that violent era, which, by the way, considered to what happened this week, is not violent at all, created a change of psyche, and we entered what is known as the Oslo Accords. And the Oslo Accord was a series of negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians, meaning suddenly the conversation about the West Bank and the Gaza Strip was no longer between Israel and Egypt, Israel and Jordan, but with the Palestinian people themselves. And we were going back and forth, and we started to enter a whole system of chunks that we will do. And the idea was to create a Palestinian state, a two-state solution, with Gaza Strip and the West Bank as Palestine, and in the middle will be an Israel. That will be a Palestinian state, and in the middle of Israel will be a Jewish state. That was the idea. It was going back and forth. It did not progress as planned. It was supposed to last 5 years. And eventually in the year 2000, when everything was stuck, Clinton was president at the time, comes up and puts a proposal on the table, which was a take it or leave it proposal, called Clinton Parameter. There's a few names to it. And he generally says that the Gaza Strip will be fully evacuated, by Jews. West Bank mostly will be evacuated. It will form a two-state solution. Jerusalem will be divided. There will be some agreement about right of return for Palestinian refugees, a whole list of things. At the time, the Palestinian leader, which was dominant and won with hardly any opposition, was Yasser Arafat. And Yasser Arafat generally said no. And there's a lot of explanations. And by the way, that's not a narrative. You can talk to the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, Mohammed Dashtaya, and I can quote him. They say no. And I won't go into the why no right now, but there's a good explanation. They see the thing differently, but they felt that what was offered was not fair enough. The outcome of that was a very deadly, mainly 4 years, of a second uprising, which was more violent than the first one. And at that point, Israelis were a bit shocked in a way that, wait a minute, we can't annex the territory because there's a lot of Palestinians that don't want to be part of Israel at that time. And if you annex the people, you need to provide citizenship. And then at some point, you might not have a Jewish majority, so you won't be able to have a Jewish state. Then Land for Peace, which was a two-state solution, was just rejected by the Palestinians themselves. That's not an option. Status quo was very violent. That also is not an option. So we came up with a new idea, and the leader to that idea was a man called Ariel Sharon, a very hawkish, right-wing leader, and that was known as a disengagement. And pretty much what he said is, let's divide, and let's pull out unilaterally from the Gaza Strip. And if that works well, we'll do the same in the West Bank. And then if they want to do an agreement, yes or no. But in the meantime, let's pull out. We don't want to control. We don't want to be responsible for that area. And we disengage. We pull out 8,000 settlers from the Gaza Strip. The country was in favor of it. In favor is never 100%. It's a 60%. It's a democracy, but you could put it out. And maybe 55%, but you had a majority, clear majority. And we pulled out.
Before
When we
they
pulled out
pulled
of
out, sorry, Michael, who is actually who is governing the Gaza
Israel,
Strip? Israel. Okay.
Israel. But what happened was, and so until 87, fully Israel. Sorry, until 93, fully Israel. Between 93 and 2000, you saw the forming Palestinian Authority that was starting to take over the governing of people. But the security, the Israeli military was inside. So there was a civilian self-governance, but a military occupation of Israel up to 2000. And 2000 was a full evacuation. Everything comes out. No Jew left, no soldier, no one there. And the idea is that that would have been a case study. And if that works, we will continue and disengage in the West Bank, actually with a whole plan from north to south. And there was elections again. And the Israeli public voted in favor of carrying on of disengaging. So we have an indicator through democracy that by the year 2006, the majority of Israelis want to pull out of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. What we saw in 2006 was that the amount of missiles that were launched before the disengagement from Gaza. From 2001, we see missiles and mortars on a short range around the Gaza Strip. Suddenly doubled and tripled. I'm talking about a range mainly up to 15 kilometers. So the Israeli left and the Israeli center that was in favor of the disengagement, including myself, and was in favor of disengaging from the West Bank, suddenly made a calculation. And they said, wait a minute. Ideologically, we were in favor of disengaging. And ideologically, we believe that Palestinians should have a state of their own and, self-determination. But if we pull out of the West Bank the way we pull out of Gaza, and there will be those missiles falling 15 kilometers around, that already includes Tel Aviv and 70% of Israel's population. We can't live that way. So the same people that were in favor started to move to the right, which is already explaining to you why, if you follow the news, and I know that you follow them very carefully, Israel, as a side story, became way more right-wing and hawkish throughout the last decade or more, which is another story, which if it would be a week ago, would be our main story.
Now? And what's
would be you can just imagine.
Yeah.
Right? If we had a right, now we are falling off the table on the right side, right? So, which is, as a lefty liberal, right, is not productive if you're thinking about peace in any form, which now is something that is, there's nothing more distant than the word peace. Anyway, back to our chronology of events. Israel pulled out. Missiles started to be launched on a massive system. And while all that is happening, America and Israel, the Western democracies, come up to the Palestinian people that don't have a state yet. And we tell them, you need to have a democracy, you need to have elections. No other country in the Middle East but Israel has an election, but they need an election. They went for elections, fair elections. Who won? Hamas. Hamas is an organization. We call it a terror organization. It is definitely a terror organization. But it is also a welfare, social, religious movement, organization, party. It's a whole list of different things. And for different people, it's something different. So they won elections. They won the election for the parliament. Generally, Israel and America said in that point, wait a minute. When we said elections, we didn't mean that you'll vote for the wrong party. You can't vote for Hamas. It's a terror organization. They call for the destruction of Israel. We can't work with you. Anyhow, while all that was happening, the Palestinian Authority, the chair of the Palestinian Authority, which is the same chairman of today, Mahmoud Abbas, known also as Abu Mazen, which to my knowledge yet did not condemn or say a single word about everything that's happening this week, right? Understood that he can't work with Hamas. So he prevented them part of what they should get as an elected party. And within a year, because they had their own militias in Gaza, they threw out what's known as the Fatah. It's a party that was dominant in the Palestinian Authority in the most brutal ways, not nearly as brutal than what happened this week, but very brutal still, and completely took over the Gaza Strip. Now we, as Westerners, I'm saying we, Israel, assuming that most of the listeners are Americans, we use the word coup. Hamas took over, made a coup, and threw out the Palestinian Authority. But the way that Hamas framed it, and I understand where they're coming from, said, we made a coup. We are the elected party. We took what we deserve, which we didn't get after elections. And what happened since 2007, 2008 was a Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip. A Palestinian Authority controlled West Bank, and the West Bank is divided to places that are fully controlled by the Palestinian Authority, semi-controlled, controlled by Israel. There's a whole blend over there. But Gaza was fully controlled by Hamas. And then Israel said, what are we supposed to do with that terror organization? And now you're starting to see an evolution of attempts. For the first year, Israel said, well, as long as Hamas is in power, we are closing all direction. We don't want to hear from you. We can't work with you because you're calling for destruction. Except for some humanitarian issues, because you can't close it. We are providing them electricity, we're providing them water, we're providing them any necessity. Very important to remind the listener that they also have a border with Egypt. But Egypt never provided them with anything. So all the humanitarian necessities always came from Israel, not from Egypt. But that actually say that Israel, we can't close the light, we can't close the electricity. But we will do a semi-blockade, not a full blockade, but a semi-blockade. And that was the current situation. Proved, by the way, inefficient. Because through tunnels and through Egypt and through all sort of ways, they managed to form a very poor, very suffering, for the people it's absolutely terrible, but a certain economy. And every once in a while, drew Israel and themselves into this round of conflict. We reacted in violence, unproportional violence. Well, that didn't do any good. We reacted poorly with no violence. Well, they said in this case we can launch more missiles. Well, that didn't do any good. And then, with the last two governments, Israel lost two governments, meaning in the last 2 years, we looked at a new model and saying, okay, we tried everything. It seems that they just don't have enough to lose. They're so poor. They're so miserable. Let's provide jobs. Let's allow at first 8,000, 10,000, 12,000, 15,000 people to work in Israel. And that will start, boosting their economy. And then if that works well, more people will come to work in Israel. Because I don't know if you know, but from the people that are killed, we know for 21 Thai workers, people that are working in agriculture in the south, a lot of them coming from Thailand. Doesn't make any sense. And you have people that are needing work, right a rock away, right there. So that started a model. And people were thinking that we're in favor of that idea because, the economy will boost. So we actually changed the whole system. And you did see things quieting down. And if you would ask me 2 weeks ago, I would tell you that might be proving itself. Because look, the fact is that things are quiet. And more money started to come in from Qatar and the Emirates for Israel. And what I didn't know until a week ago, that all that quiet era, they were planning one of the most sophisticated, deadliest attacks. One of the deadliest attacks in modern history, which was done brilliantly. That was a cover to all of that. And suddenly on one morning, that happened. And since our assumption was that the model of, providing jobs is actually working, by the way, it doesn't mean that there's a lot of injustice, a lot of problems. We could do it better. There's a lot of things. Mainly in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip. The truth is that I always say the situation is terrible. I just don't have another solution, right? As long as Hamas is in power, and how do you uproot Hamas? So that is pretty much the reality that led to the case. Now, the fact that Palestinians are suffering, absolutely. The fact that they don't have, absolutely. What is the solution and who is responsible for it? That would be where the argument will be. If Hamas would not have taken over, or if Hamas would modernize throughout the years, there would be an open border. And maybe that would create also the sentiment and the trust among Israelis to go back to what majority of us voted for up to 2006 in the two-state solution. Today, if you tell an Israeli two-state solution, I wouldn't advise you to wait to see the response. It sounds like science fiction. Even I can tell you, ideologically, I think that's justice. But pragmatically, I don't see that in any other way, and no Palestinian does.
Yeah. Do you think that what's happening right now in terms of Israel's response, given that I think it's over. I think it's about 50% of Palestinians are under the age of 18. Do you think this will further radicalize
Yes.
Palestinians for the next generation? And
Yes.
what does that then look like for your the generation of your kids?
I don't have any, I'm sorry to say that, but I don't have any positive prediction for the future right now. I hope that I'm wrong, but what you just said, your assessment is true. First of all, the radicalization and the hatred is already significant. That was an understatement that I very lightly framed. It is going to be, every round of violence is going to be worse on their side and on our side. I'm hearing things, voices by my liberal friends over here that I wouldn't have thought that I would hear from those people a week ago. And I can't argue. I mean, I wouldn't say it. I don't think it. I also know personally people on the other side, which I'm afraid for people in God that that I know, but a lot of people that don't know anyone on the other side just don't want to hear. Don't have. We lost our empathy. They definitely lost their empathy, and therefore, as bad as it was, right now we're looking at a fast growing escalation of everything. And right now, I don't see anything positive coming out of it. How, some people are saying maybe it is so bad, it can't get any worse. Maybe from here we can build. Oh, okay, let's see. But I right now I don't see a scenario of any positive progress, and I hope reality will prove me wrong. But it's very important because you mentioned the Israel's reaction. I hope that we as a society, as a country, as a government, as soldiers, will manage to control our anger, our emotions, and be productive in our attack in order not to make sure that there's no civilian people that you can avoid, that no one uninvolved will be killed, and really remember that we need to maintain, their lives and our souls.
Yeah. Um, do you have a couple more? You have some more time, Michael?
Let's do a few more minutes.
Yeah. Egypt, you mentioned them. They could have taken over the Gaza Strip, but they said it was part of Palestine. More recently, I think they initially refused to take any refugees, and then I think I saw news this morning, as of Saturday morning in the U.S., Saturday night in Israel, that they've agreed to take some refugees. Can you give us some context as to what that might look like?
Yes. So first of all, Egypt today is an ally to Israel, not to Hamas. Hamas is an offshoot of an organization called Islamic Brotherhood, which is an opposition to the current president in Egypt. And when Egypt plays a mediator between Hamas and Israel, if they're biased in any way, they're biased towards Israel. What I told you right now, by the way, alone should give you hope. Because if I would have told you what I just said in 1973, you would think that is outrageous. So here you see that our deadliest enemy, Egypt from 1973, became our ally today. So things can change. Things can change. That's a side note.
Yeah, and I think Michael, I think they get the second most amount of aid behind the U.S. Behind Israel.
Now, Egypt, people are saying, why doesn't Egypt take the refugees? Let me a minute have empathy to Egypt itself. Egypt is a country of over 100 million people, where most of them are poor. When I'm saying poor, millions of them are more poor than the people in Gaza. So how will they take the refugees? People in Gaza have UNRWA, which is a UN branch which takes care of them. I'm not talking about this week. This week is one big tragedy for the people in Gaza, right? But I'm looking 2 weeks ago. People there have UN branches. They have support. Where if you're a poor Egyptian, no one supports you in the world. You've got a place called Deaf City in Cairo. 1 million people are living in a cemetery. So Egypt doesn't have the means. They're hardly managing to feed their own people. So how will they take 2 additional million people that don't want to be Egyptian, want to be Palestinian in the land of Palestine? So ideologically, why would Egypt deal with the occupation of Gaza? Let Israel deal with that. They have their own problems. So I don't blame Egypt for not taking it. It's politically understandable. As for refugees, until today, they never took refugees. They have their own problems. Sinai, which is bordering, was controlled for many, many years by ISIS and all sort of what is known as Salafic organizations. What is going to happen in the next few days, I don't know. But Egypt will do its best to prevent Palestinian refugees from coming to Egypt. They will not be interested in all of that. So I don't know where that's going. On the more wider circle, the name of the game is Iran. And I'm talking to you as someone that your family was, escaped Iran. It will be very interesting to follow the planning and the execution of this attack that we faced last week. And I'm willing to bet that eventually there will be the proof that will prove that Iran was behind the attack. And what is Iran? Iran has a long-going, conflict with Israel. But if you're looking at what was the biggest headline from the Middle East 2 weeks ago, potential peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And I don't know if you know, but right now there is no movement in that direction. I don't know if that will happen again, especially assuming there will be more violence, and the Arab world is going to be boiling in the next few days and weeks. That just postponed any Israeli-Saudi relation, which is exactly what Iran wanted. And whatever's happening over here served Iran. So in many ways, I'm almost surprised, and that's part of my surprise, that Hamas fell into that trap and served as a tool of Iran, because Hamas is Palestinian, and they were in charge of Palestinian people, and Palestinian people are suffering, and Iran is not. So it'll be very
The Iranian people are, but the Iranian regime
aren't. The Iranian people are not. The Iranian regime is not, and Palestinian people are paying the price.
But Iranian people have been paying the price for the last whatever many years, no?
Right, yes, yeah. But I'm saying not that they're paying the price of the conflict with Israel mainly through the lack of budget and economy that's going into their own benefits, because it's going into sponsoring Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen and so on. But they're not facing Israeli raids and attacks in Tehran. So that's what I'm talking about, the price. They are paying other forms of prices. And one of the biggest fears that Israel is having right now, and that also in America, not every day does America bring in their, I forgot what you call it, those big ships, sorry.
The naval ships?
Yeah, just entered the Middle East.
The Marines?
Two massive naval ships came into the Middle East right now, American one with a massive force. It's a signal to Iran. Don't take advantage of Israel's weakness right now, and don't allow Hezbollah to start. Now, what's happening, and it's making the news. I don't know if it's making it to your side of the ocean, but for the last few days, a few times a day, you've got a mortar here, a missile there, and some encountering with Hezbollah. And the question is, will Hezbollah join the war? Perhaps they will join once we go into a ground operation, invasion, which makes
it harder,
which makes it likely for it to happen. But maybe Hezbollah will join in. If Hezbollah joins in, whatever we saw from Hamas are not nearly strong, and with not nearly the abilities that Iran has.
How do we know that? We know that
from intelligence. We know it because we know that they have 150,000 missiles aimed on every given point on Israel. And while Hamas was a terror organization forming this attack under very difficult conditions, they're blocked by Egypt, by Israel, by the sea. I mean, they did a brilliant operation. Hezbollah has almost open borders through Syria to Iran. Hezbollah is a branch, an elite unit, maybe one of the strongest Iranian units. Only the soldiers are Lebanese Shiites in Lebanon. When they come into war, you're talking about Tel Aviv, you're talking about a completely different scale that Israel has never experienced. So we are waiting every minute, checking the news. Did Hezbollah come in? We are expecting it. All the villages on the border of Lebanon evacuated their people. There's no one there. They're all
where we were standing together at the Golan.
There's no one there. No, that's it. We stood on the Syrian border. On the Lebanese border, they're completely evacuated. Syria will be next. So they evacuated those kibbutzim because they all experienced what happened for them by Hamas when they came into the kibbutzim. No one's waiting to see what Hezbollah will do to them. So you understand that we have right now the southern part, which was literally butchered and burned down. You've got a kibbutz that was burned to ashes. Nothing there. They occupied a region and held it for a day till we reoccupied it. And Hezbollah is a different story. And does Hezbollah can draw it to a whole, one big battle with Iran itself? So those are the things that we are afraid for the nearby future. And that's an escalation that is definitely something that can happen.
Michael, I know you have to go. I have two more questions for you. One is, we're talking about broader conflict, Iran's involvement, the U.S. sending a huge naval ship. Do you worry about a further broader escalation and like this creating a World War III?
I don't want to say I don't want to say the word World War III just because why use those terms? But you started. I'll go to the beginning of your question. Okay, I'll allow myself, to answer, to cut your question. Are you worried? Okay. Yes, I'm worried. I'm worried for every potential thing, and I don't want to use even what you just offered as an option. But after what I saw this week, if you would ask me 2 weeks ago, if 1% of what happened this week can happen, I would tell you absolutely not. And I'm considered an expert in the topic. Okay. So that's why my ability of telling you what's about to happen in the future, or what we say, the business of prophecy is not a business to invest in. I don't know what the future is about. I am deeply worried. How worried should I be? I don't know, but I am worried. That's how I would answer your question.
How can we here in the U.S. And abroad support the spread of truth and help prevent the spread of misinformation, which is rampant right now? You see so many videos being doctored and changed. And
First of all, check your sources. Check your sources. Talk to people on the ground that first of all see it and are not fed by media only. I can tell you that always, not only in those dramatic things, there's a big gap between what media shows and can show and what reality is on the ground like. People are posting one-line claims on Instagram without checking anything. That's something that I highly suggest not to do. It's easy for me to say, look at papers like Haaretz, look at a podcast called Unholy Podcast. Israeli podcasts and channels, which I believe. When I say I believe it, it's not that I'm not questioning, because some journalists just are not informed, don't know. Sometimes you get information with disinformation. There is always things that are fake, but generally, those are outlets that are looking that are investing a lot of efforts of being at least accurate. And even if it's a narrative, so it's a narrative, but at least information, because narrative is not right or wrong. What's a narrative? That's what happened. My narrative will just pick 5 things from what happened and offer it to you, and ignore the other 5 things that might be true, I'm just not bringing to the table. So a fair Palestinian versus a fair Israeli will be just people that are taking right things that are true, and putting them on the table. So everyone picks their own truth. That's fair, right? But then you have a lot of bias, and I would be very careful of believing the sources that are coming from the same people that just beheaded babies. I mean, wait a minute. If they can do that for their own people, will they not lie for their own people? So be very cautious, I think. I think that probably what's about to happen is people will stay with their own beliefs. Whoever was semi-supportive to Israel, might be more supportive to Israel. And anyone that hated Israel before will find a reason to hate Israel even more. I mean, I think that it will even polarize what was polarized before more. And anyone that is involved, like you, but the moment you brought that podcast, you got involved, right? Is actually be more challenged with the polarization that's about to happen around that topic in America, especially in a few days when Israel will move a bit away from being the victim to being the aggressor. And then I think you'll be challenged with that story.
Yeah. Yeah, the polarization is definitely, I see it. It's like a lot of me and my friends and community are posting on social media, but I'm like, who's seeing these posts? It's just other Jews and
The
Israelis.
same people.
Yeah, it's making, but I think it's like supporting the sense of identity amongst them, and then you have a whole section and probably like center who thinks it's disgusting what has happened. But you know, it kind of even reminds me of, I know it might be extreme, of like moments in the Holocaust where people were silent to a certain extent, and we say never again, but still there's a certain amount of apathy. Some people just don't know what to say, and then on the left, or you don't need to call it left, or the other side, the people that have always been a little bit more on the other side of the narrative have just, you're seeing the polarization and that viewpoint getting more extreme. So social media is like
But we need to be very cautious from fake news that will be coming, and a lot of people were posting things that they didn't intend to. They just don't know that are not necessarily true. So I think that before posting very easily, people need to check their sources, make sure that what they're saying is actually true. Already, people were saying there's a lot of sentiment, growing sentiment, which I'm hearing, that we invented it, that babies were not killed. They helped babies. Well, where are those babies? They're not here. They're not around. They're gone. Right? And the bodies, the burnt pile of bodies is there. So there's a lot of that just false. And today with technology, you can play with information very easily.
Yeah, well, people are saying the same. People have said the same thing about the Holocaust, and unfortunately, that it was made up and it's a myth and all that. Michael, I feel like I can go on with you for hours. I would highly recommend, if people need a break from the news and social media but want to be educated on the topic, to check out your book, Israel Joruney. It's
So definitely should be a new chapter written,
a
but
new book written. I think that you
a
need
new book written, but actually a new chapter, because if you want to go to the nuanced story, which is behind the scenes, if you want to understand the psychology that brought us to this day, that's what the book is about. Already the next chapter is happening right now. I didn't predict it, obviously, but you can get maybe the context through it.
Yeah. Sending you, your family, Israel, the innocent people of Palestine, my prayers, lots of love, and I hope it's not looking good, but I think it's creating some level of unity and community, even in the most tragic, difficult times in the world. And I appreciate you coming here to share your wisdom, experience, and perspectives, and hope we can do this again.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much.